Good evening, those of you who are live with us for iChurch tonight. So great to have you with us. Bear with us. We'll get started in a moment or so and look forward to being able to share some word and some wisdom with you in just a little bit. So bear with us as we make a couple of adjustments and people are logging on and we're getting ready to roll here in just a moment. So I'm going to be sharing some exciting and powerful insight and information with you this evening. So great to have you with us. And we are, as I said, just going to get started in about 30 seconds where we've got people that are logging on and getting ready to spend some time in the book. So great to have you with us this evening. Those of you who are catching it live, thanks for being with us in real time. Those of you who are watching the playback of this at a later date, thanks for the investment of your time, for carving out some time at your convenience when you have it to spend a few minutes in the Word. We're going to do about 30 minutes tonight and just share some things. You know, those of you that are part of our local Metro Life Church family and you were in the house Sunday morning, you remember that we started a new series on the life of Jacob out of Genesis 25 and 26. And we've titled that series, The Journey. And that message, I Was Made for More, is available on the podcast link at metrolifechurch.us. And I highly encourage you, if you've not had an opportunity to hear that message, to check it out at your convenience. You can download that or stream it in real time for free. So tonight in our teaching, we are going to spend a few minutes looking a little bit deeper and unpacking some things that we were not able to get to Sunday morning that relate specifically to Rebecca. And in Sunday's message, we dealt with her to an extent. We qualified the term wrestling and dealt with that quite a bit. And it means literally to contend. To wrestle means you're contending for something. And so we dealt Sunday morning in that message out of Genesis 25 when Rebecca conceives. Remember, she was barren. Isaac intercedes for her. She conceives twins. She doesn't know she's got twins. All she knows is that she has warfare going on in her, I call it, inner world. And let me unpack that term for a minute because it's essential to recognize the difference between what I call inner world dynamics and outer world dynamics. There's a New Testament equivalent of that, the passage that Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5, when he said, when we were entering into Macedonia, our flesh had no rest. The word rest means relief or release. We were totally consumed. So he's in a season there of no comfort. There's no comfort. He's got fighting. He said that outside I've got in my fighting, I'm fighting externally and I'm in fear internally. He talks about inner world dynamics, what's going on inside him. That's heart, mind. As we've taught recently, you are a soul, you don't have a soul. So really, we wouldn't say heart, mind, soul, because you are a soul. That's your thinking, your thought life, your imaginations, your appetites, your desires, your drives. It's where you dream. It's where you feel pain. Your soul is who you really are. That is the real, true you. That's your inner world. The things that go on inside you and your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions, that's your inner world. The outer world are the circumstances that you have to contend with or wrestle with. You wrestle with circumstances. You wrestle with situations. You wrestle with the larger season that you're in and all of the stuff that accompanies that season. So that's the qualification between inner world is what's going on inside you. Outer world means what you're having to deal with in your circumstances, situations, seasons, people, stresses. So Paul said, when we're coming into Macedonia, our flesh, our humanity, I had no relief. I was in a comfortless season because I had outer world conflicts and inner world wrestlings. I had outer world conflicts, inner world wrestling. So I'm not just going through some stuff in my situations. I'm going through some things inside me. I'm wrestling in my inner world. Now, why that matters is because Rebecca when she's wrestling, or when Jacob and Esau are wrestling with her, that is a type of inner world wrestling. Something's going on in her that she doesn't have insight to until the Holy Spirit gives her a revelation of why there is wrestling in her inner world. And as we dealt with Sunday, that wrestling was the result of the fact that there were two different futures in her. There's the Jacob future, which is Jacob carries the prophetic destiny, the destiny DNA, the purposes of God that he had revealed through Abraham, passed on to Isaac. They're coming to manifestation through Jacob's journey, even though he's going to be the second born. Esau has a different destiny, a different future. So there are those seasons when we have inner world wrestlings that are in relation to the future God's birthing through us. And so I don't want to get caught up in that this evening. It's just a reminder about where we are in this series, as well as the fact to qualify my inner world versus my outer world. I don't want you to get hung up on terms or verbiage. Just your inner world's what's going on inside you, and your outer world's what's going on around you. And it's the wrestlings of your inner world, ultimately, that you'll find are going to shape the outcomes in your outer world. What's going on in you is a big deal. What's going on in you is a key indicator to what God's up to as it relates to the fulfillment of his purposes with your life. God's up to something, even in those seasons when we're wrestling. So Rebecca represents this, but I want to really unpack some very powerful things about Rebecca as it relates to her shaping the future. And so as we unpack this tonight, there's some prophetic and some kingdom truth we talk about, but there's also some practical things that matter. So as I have spent a couple of moments reminding us of Rebecca's role, I want to share some additional information that we have not talked about concerning her. You may or may not be aware of this, or you may just need a refresher in your own memory. And if you want to find it, it's in Genesis 24. In Genesis 24, Abraham is getting older, and Sarah has died. And so Abraham tasks his chief household manager, for lack of a better term, Eliezer, to go to the land where he came from, where Abraham came from, and get a wife for Isaac. And so Eliezer has to go on a journey. Every divine outcome in your life, let me just back up for a minute. Every divine outcome is the result of a prophetic journey. By prophetic journey, I mean God's doing something, he's moving something. You're having to walk out the future. The wrestlings of your inner world are shaping the outcomes in your outer world. And so you have to walk out the journey to the place of fulfillment. So Eliezer, Abraham stays where he is in Canaan. He sends Eliezer back to Mesopotamia, where he had come from, and back to Laban's house. And so where Laban's family is, and Rebecca is Laban's sister. Rebecca is a young woman, and Eliezer does not know whom God has chosen. And here's the point. Rebecca is God's choice. This matters because God has selected Rebecca to shape the future of the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham through Jacob. And this is very essential. It's really important that we grasp this when we look in just a couple of moments in Genesis 27, because what you need to understand is that God has a way of assigning future shapers to our lives, people who are selected by him and brought into our lives for the purpose of shaping the future. God declares it prophetically. God gives you a word, a promise, an experience, a covenant. He releases something into your life. He gives you an encounter, a contact moment. You have that you can bank on, but you're not going to get where you need to be by yourself. So there's the balance in the journey of faith, the journey from promise to possession, the journey from faith to fulfillment, where we faith our way into that season of fulfillment. that journey, we may feel like we're making it alone, but God appoints shapers, people who are selected and chosen by him to shape the future. And it's important to understand this, because Abraham doesn't know that it's Rebekah. Isaac doesn't know Rebekah. God is up to something strategic in terms of his choices and his selections, because God has identified Rebekah as somebody he can trust to handle his promises and to mentor, to counsel, and to shape Jacob from the moment he's born into the world. As we mentioned Sunday, Jacob's born in the posture of a possessor. Remember, he's grabbing Esau's heel, and all that represents, all that means, that cannot be let go of. So the interesting thing is that before any of that comes about, God had already called Rebekah to shape the future and to handle his promise. And so just on an encouragement level, it's important to see. So Rebekah's not Abraham's daughter. She is called by God to become his daughter-in-law, to mother the promise of God. Very important that Rebekah is called to mother. So, there's a unique story. You can find it in Genesis 24. When Eliezer meets her, he prays a prayer, God, let the woman you've chosen for Isaac, let your choice to help shape the future, that divine appointment. God, let her say a certain thing when I get to the well. Let me meet the right person, and I need you to confirm it. That's confirmation. We talked Sunday about God giving us confirmation. And we go through seasons when there is no confirmation, but then God brings confirming experiences across our path to seal the deal. And I want to reiterate it this evening, that for those that have been in a dry season where you've been without confirmation that you're on the path you're supposed to be on, you're headed the direction that you're where you're supposed to be, the confirmation that you're on the right path, that you're where you're supposed to be, and that what God has promised you or revealed, that has birthed pursuit in you, God's going to bring you into a season where he refreshes your faith with external, outer world confirmations to help settle the inner world conflicts that have been roughing you up. And so God puts the exact verbiage in Rebekah's mouth when she meets Eliezer at the well. She doesn't know who Eliezer is. She's got no idea that God has already grafted her in and called her to mother the future. He's called her to mother his purpose, because she's the vehicle through which Jacob is going to be born, but not just brought into the earth, but mentored and trained. So there's a real sense of you needing to understand that God is never going to call you to that which he's not already equipped you for. Now, the equipping may not show up until you begin to walk out the calling. Let me repeat that. The equipping, the confidence that you've got what it takes to succeed, because God doesn't call any of us to fail. God calls no one to failure. He calls us to shape, create, form, and give expression to the future that wants to emerge. Those things that are in our inner world that are wrestling and contending to come into being in their fullness. See, those are the things that God has called you to. And so Rebekah is really a model of being called to something she doesn't yet know she's called for, but she's fully equipped to mother God's promise. In other words, in a real way, God was saying by calling Rebekah to be Isaac's wife and ultimately Jacob's mother, I trust you, Rebekah, to mature, to shape, and to counsel my purposes, my promise, and to help form the identity in Jacob that he's going to need to have, that he's not going to get from Isaac, because Isaac has a different value system. Isaac sees the world differently. So, Rebekah, I've given you wisdom. I've given you skill. I've made you shrewd. I've made you intuitive. I've made you perceptive. I've made you a keeper of the flame. I've made you to want to facilitate, help facilitate, and shape the promise I've given to Abraham. So God has already said all of these things about Rebekah over her life. She just hasn't heard them yet. She doesn't know them. But when she connects with Abraham's servant and he reveals his purpose and what his mission was, that he had come from Abraham to take a wife for his son Isaac, she willingly goes. She embraces her assignment. And so she marries Isaac, and then we end up in Genesis 25 where we were, right? And we dealt with that. So she goes to God when she's contending in her inner world. She's at war inside. By the way, we mentioned this Sunday, the level of warfare you go through, the inner world wrestling, your wrestling is always reflective of the level of significance that you have in the heart of God and to the purpose of God. So Rebekah is bearing the burden in the wrestling season of those twins. We mentioned Sunday, mean they were violently abusing and crushing and oppressing one another. There's real violence going on inside Rebekah. And she says, what's up with me? What's going on with me? What's wrong? And God says, it's not about what's wrong. It's about what's emerging through your struggle. And so Rebekah becomes, and this is important, she becomes a model of a very powerful woman of God. She's, we talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I don't think sometimes we give the proper credit to Rebekah because she's the one, not Isaac. Rebekah shaped Jacob's appetite to possess the blessing of Abraham. She hears God say to her, the younger will serve the older. The second-born will dominate the firstborn because he carries my promise. He is going to carry my blessing. He's going to carry my purpose. The fulfillment of prophetic destiny is going to be in the younger son, not the firstborn. Rebekah hears that. Now watch what she does. She does not go in to a place of passivity. She takes a level of responsibility, so she becomes, frankly, Rebekah becomes a type of prophetic leadership, doing something with the promise of God in your life that begins to shape it, that begins to form it, because she develops, as you read through Genesis 25, where we did the other day, and then you begin to look at Genesis 27, where we will read in a moment, she begins to influence Jacob. The Bible said, as I think we mentioned it Sunday, Isaac loves Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Motherly love, but also shaping. She understands Jacob, shaping Jacob's heart, his mindset, his identity as the carrier of the destiny of their family. She shapes him. She begins. Rebekah is key at influencing and shaping the future. So there are two distinct dimensions to that I want to unpack for a moment. The first of which is every one of us, when God puts something in you, he gives it to you because he's called you to help shape the future he wants to create. So you are a shaper of the future. The future is not something that's going to just happen. It's going to be the result of God's prophetic declaration and what you do with it. The decisions you make, the path you take, who you choose to influence, and who you allow to influence you. Rebekah is a type of prophetic leadership because what she does is she then takes Jacob on as an assignment. So we understand, we read Sunday morning that when they became old, the account of Jacob, quote, taking Esau's birthright, and he didn't take anything. He simply went after what God had already authorized him to possess. And we qualified that in great detail on Sunday. And that's in Genesis 25. So now I want you to look at Genesis 27, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about Rebekah. Because there are two distinct issues as we work through this. The first of which is, maybe you haven't known it, but you're going to come into a season where you become a Rebekah of sorts. That God's going to begin bringing people across your path for you to shape. Also, not just people, but the things you carry, the dreams, the purposes, the things God has deposited in you, the wrestlings of your inner world. are because you are Rebecca in the sense of you're being called and qualified. You have been qualified to shape the future. God won't give you anything he doesn't trust you with. That's not deep. It's not very profound, but it's powerful and it's so simple. I think we miss it. Why does God say to you what he said to you? Why do you have that burden on you or that vision in you? Why is that in your heart? Why is it that idea won't let you go? I'm going to tell you why. God put it in you because he knew he could trust you with it. So revelation, when God gives us revelation, it's also him affirming to us that he trusts us, that we have what it takes. Somebody that I'm talking to right now, you need to know, you need a confidence boost of sorts to know that God never would have tasked you with that thing you carry if he didn't trust you entirely with it. God's confident in your ability to carry out your assignment. You are a Rebecca to the future God has called you to shape. So Rebecca doesn't take a passive approach. She takes a proactive, aggressive approach. She understands her assignment is not just to be a mom to Jacob, but to be a mentor and help shape the future. So Genesis 27, I'm going to read real quick. If you've got a Bible or a Bible app in front of you, you can reference it. So Genesis 27 simply says, beginning verse 1, now it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he calls his older son Esau, and he says to him, my son. Esau says, here I am. Isaac says, behold, I'm old, and I don't know the day when I'm going to die. Therefore, take your gear, your quiver, your bow, go out to the field and hunt game for me. Please pay attention. And prepare a savory dish that I love and bring it to me to eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die. Isaac is saying to Esau, I'm about to transfer the prophetic blessing of Abraham. I'm about to move apostolically as a father in your life and release some things that establish the boundaries of your future and bring you into partnership with God where nobody will be able to stop you. So, and that's really what the blessing is. In a totally different setting, I'm going to deal with in detail the blessing of Abraham and the blessing of God and what it means. I'm not going to get into all of that tonight. We don't have time. But just as a snapshot, it's important to understand the blessing is the key to the future and the destiny that Esau could have had, but that Jacob was called to have. Without the blessing, they're not going to be able to become everything God had called them to become. So this is a critical moment. And the reason I underscore that is watch verse 5. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. Listening. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, listen as I command you. I really want you, oh my goodness, I really want you to pay specific attention to verses 4 through 12, where we're reading now, or verse 13. I really want you to grasp this. Now, therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you will bring it to your father so he can eat it, so that he may bless you before his death. And Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I'm a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, your curse be on me. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. And so we know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would have said back in the day. We know now the rest of the story simply is what? Jacob does what his mother counsels him to do, and he ends up possessing the blessing. Now, I want to get through a couple of things real quick to really just encapsulate our time as it relates to Rebekah's role. So you remember on Sunday, we dealt with the fact that for far too long, many in leadership in the kingdom have mislabeled and misidentified Jacob and accusing him of having deceived or stolen what was not his. When the passage we read right here makes it very clear, in addition to what God said in Malachi 1 and in Romans chapter 9, I love Jacob, I hate Esau. When God said, I love Jacob, I hate Esau, we unpacked that Sunday morning. Here you see that, and this is so essential to grasp as it relates to Rebekah's authority and her assignment to help shape the future. We see here that the idea to dress up like Esau and pretend he was Esau was Rebekah's, not Jacob's. It was never in Jacob's mind to present himself to Isaac as his brother in order to, so he's already got the birthright. That's earthly blessing. But Jacob's now called to and authorized by God to go after the blessing of heaven, which is a totally different level. The blessing of heaven is a totally different level. See, when you get the birthright, you get what's left of daddy's blessing. You get a double portion of it. That means you receive an inheritance off what Isaac earned. But when you get the blessing of Abraham, when you get the blessing of heaven, when God's blessing prophetically comes on you, now you are authorized to succeed supernaturally without Isaac's help. And so it speaks to being able to create your own path, carve out a name for yourself, overcome your own enemies. You're not riding daddy's coattails. So the blessing of God is a totally different deal because it's supernatural, heavenly favor and heavenly power to come into overthrow and reversal. Now, why do I say that? Why is that important? Because go back to what God told Rebekah in Genesis 25 when the twins are violently at war in her womb. God reveals to her then Jacob's prophetic destiny. Now, so what has Rebekah done for all of those years? She has incubated the prophetic purpose and promise in her heart. She's carried a word from God about Jacob all of those years. And so when it says in verse 4, Rebekah was listening, I want to go back to that. What it means is God had called Rebekah to be intuitive, to be aware of the time and season she was in, to position herself to paying attention for the right time to implement a strategy that God dropped in her mind. Rebekah is a powerful woman in her own right because she's prophetically present. She's got intuition that gives her present moment awareness about what time and season they're in. So she doesn't hear. The Bible doesn't say she hears. It says she was listening. That speaks to intentionally positioning herself where she's paying attention to what's going on around her because she's waiting for a moment she knows she's going to have where now she can step in the gap, shift the direction of the trajectory of the way things look like they're going to be, and now she can begin to effectively shape Jacob's outcome like God wanted it to be. This is highly important because there are those of us that are called to be future shapers like Rebekah, and then we also have Rebekahs in our life. This is gender neutral. People whom God has prophetically and strategically positioned to mentor and facilitate to further the future he's called us to through their counsel, through their intuition, through their mentoring, through how they shape us. And so it's very important to recognize that Rebekah had been looking for an opportunity. This was not the first time she was intentionally positioning herself to pay attention to the words that were coming out of Isaac's mouth. She's listening to his speech patterns. She's listening to the types of conversations she's having. She perceives a shift in Isaac that lets her know, the time is now to implement the strategy that's going to bring the promise God gave me and the revelation that I've carried for decades, that now is time to implement strategy in the outer world that causes what's been going on in my inner world to come to pass. The wrestlings of my inner world shape the outcomes in my outer world. So God knew before he brought Eliezer to Rebekah in Genesis 24, God knew he could trust Rebekah to carry that, to facilitate it, to shape it, and to seek for opportunity. So anybody that tells us Jacob stole the blessing after he stole the birthright, well, no, he doesn't. First of all, you cannot steal what God has appointed you to possess. We made that case very strongly Sunday morning. But now we see further that Jacob doesn't steal the blessing. He's following the counsel of the mentor God had established to bring great influence in his thinking, so Jacob would not miss his opportunity. There's a small window of opportunity that if Jacob doesn't have the right counselor in the right position at the right moment, he's going to miss what God wanted to give him. Rebekah is that key player in that moment who shapes the future because of her positioning to listen and be able to glean on what Isaac's plan is. So I'm going to submit to you that the idea, the plan, the idea, and the strategy. When you look at those that passage we read here in Genesis 27 verses 4 through 14, you see idea, plan, strategy. Those three things: an idea, a plan, and a strategy that come together in Rebekah's thinking in that season, that all help facilitate the revelation, the prophetic revelation that God had dropped in her heart and spoke to her in Genesis 25 all those years before. That's essential because it's imperative to understand that, like Rebekah, when we carry things for seasons, God will bring us to a moment, please catch this, where the things we've carried intuitively that God's given us, that we've carried in our inner world, there comes a time when God brings about a shift in the timing we're in, so that intuition gives way to ideas, plans, and strategies that begin to bring to pass the promise we carry. You're not absent from the process, standing on the outside looking in as an outside observer. You're deeply and centrally involved in the shaping of that future. And so for those that carry things in you, but you haven't been able to bring it together, there comes a moment. I'm telling you tonight, there comes a moment. You're going to come into your moment when the thing you carry is going to shift to a place where now the timing is right for God to begin to give you ideas, out of which you devise plans and strategies to implement the idea to bring the promise to pass. The inner world thing you carry becomes an outer world expression, and you begin shaping the future. And it's important because I am convinced, in the depth of my understanding of this book and who God is and how he operates and how he works through people, I am convinced God gave Rebekah the idea to position Jacob as though he were Esau. You say, Pastor, how, that sounds deceptive. How could you say God would be in that? Well, God's all up in it because he prophetically declared before she even knew she was pregnant with twins. God says, here's your issue. Here's what's going on in your inner world, because there is a world that I'm going to shape externally. And so here's an interesting thing. Apparently, when you study how Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob, apparently Rebekah has to step in. God has to give Rebekah this idea, to create this plan, to birth this strategy, because Isaac is not in tune with the destiny on Jacob's life. Isaac should have known. that the prophetic fulfillment of the promise of the blessing of God, that mantle of God's blessing on Abraham that had transferred from Abraham down on to Isaac. Isaac should have had enough perception, insight, and prophetic distinction to understand Esau is not the one God's hands on for our family's future. It's Jacob. But Isaac doesn't see that. He doesn't get it. So when some people don't get things about you, God will interject the right people who will perceive the right things about you. Rebekah becomes the key player. She's the bridge. How does the mantle of Abraham, how does the blessing of Abraham and Isaac get to Jacob and not Esau? Rebekah, not an angel, not a supernatural experience per se. Rebekah. God knew he needed Rebekah in that house because Rebekah's going to have the intuition, the idea. I can think, I can drop thoughts in her, and she's going to pursue them. I can give her plans and strategies, and she's going to go after them. She's going to shape them. She's going to implement them. I know I can trust her to have insight and perception into Jacob that Isaac will not have. God knew that about Rebekah. That's why one of the reasons he called her. It's very, very essential that you see that. Because then what it does is it reaffirms and validates everything God said about, I love Jacob, but I hated Esau. And then it removes any stigma or sense of illegitimacy that Jacob doesn't have the right. See, God had already given it to him. I'm gonna share a term with you over the next few times that we are together, whether corporately on Sundays or here midweek. And I want to qualify really what wrestling is. And I'm going to be belaboring this and repeating it, but I want to say it very strongly. Wrestling means you are simply you are contending to possess by experience. That's in your outer world. Wrestling, when you're wrestling something, means you're contending to possess by experience what you already have been authorized to possess by inheritance. Wrestling, when you're wrestling in your inner world or you're wrestling with circumstance, you're wrestling with something big. Wrestling means you're simply contending to possess by experience what you've already been called to possess by inheritance. The inheritance was Jacob's before he was born. The inheritance was not Jacob's because he got it deceitfully. The blessing wasn't Jacob's because he, quote, stole it. No. Jacob is wrestling under the mentorship and the watchful eye and the leadership of Rebekah, the counsel, the ideas, the strategies and the plans. I submit to you again that God put them in her mind, opened them up, gave her those the idea to even position herself to pay attention, to look for a window of opportunity, to begin to implement ideas and strategies that would make sure, that would ratify and guarantee the blessing indeed came out of Isaac's mouth over Jacob's life and not Esau's. Because Rebekah knew, because God had revealed it to her, that was what God wanted. So Jacob is wrestling under the mentorship of his mother, Rebekah, under her leadership. In this moment, she's not mama, she's a prophetic leader. She's a facilitator, mentor, prophetic coach. She's God's one person in that house who has the authority to position Jacob into the place where Jacob can now possess by experience what he had already been authorized by God to possess by inheritance. So Rebekah is a very, very powerful, powerful person. She's a key, important player. And there are, in the prophetic destiny of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and everything God had said to Abraham, and the birthing of kings and nations and prophets and priests and the tribes and the peoples. And ultimately, because of Rebekah, you and I are in the kingdom because of Jesus. It's it's not a stretch. It's a truth. She matters deeply, strongly. And so I think the last thing I really want to share with you is when you look at Jacob, when you move forward, and as we move forward in this series and we look at him, and we glean the parallels and the power of his own wrestlings, we understand that Jacob is natured very much like his mother. He's natured like Rebecca in the sense that when God puts something in him, he's going to do whatever it takes to see it come to pass. I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. Jacob's disposition is prophetically declared, and he's got that DNA in him because God put it there. But it was transferred from his mother more than it was his father. Very interesting point that Rebecca is a pursuer, a facilitator, and an incubator of the promises of God. The prophetic destiny of a nation is literally birthed through her mentorship, her leadership, her ideas, her strategies, and her plans. And she becomes a very vital person, not just to mother Jacob emotionally, though she did that, but to shape him spiritually, to shape his thinking. So when God wants to facilitate your future, he will bring the type of voices in your life who influence your thinking and your decision making to help position you where you need to be so that promise becomes possession, so that you can begin to take the action steps necessary. They're in alignment and agreement with what God has purposed to do with and through you. Rebekahs are essential to the fulfillment of the prophetic promises we carry. So I want to ask you simply a couple of questions, and then we are going to wrap up. And I realize I've gone just a little bit longer tonight. We're going to wrap up at 8:15. That's 4 minutes. We'll be done by then. A little bit longer, but I just feel strongly that we need to really honor her, but also look at what is it about Rebecca, because there is a dimension of Rebecca, or if you want to qualify it, let me qualify it this way. A Rebecca factor is at work and what God's up to with your life and through your life. And so I want to encourage anybody who's carry a sense of purpose, but you feel like maybe you haven't had the quite mentorship or leadership or direction. I just believe by faith that God's going to begin bringing some Rebekahs across your path. Maybe not many, maybe one or two that are going to shape and influence you. But the quality of your future is always determined by the quality of the influences you allow to shape your thinking. Or let me put it this way, where are you drawing not only inspiration, but information from? Who are you drawing inspiration and information from? The quality of your future is determined by the quality of the influencers that shape your thinking. Jacob has no idea. This is not Jacob's plan to pretend to be Esau so he can gain the blessing by experience that he'd been called to possess by inheritance. That's not his idea. That's his mother's. That's Rebecca's idea. She's shaping his thoughts, his influencing his thinking and his perception, and she's giving him the practical steps how to go get what God's already said was his. So watch this. 4 things I want to ask you. Number 1, who has your ear? Who has your ear? Whose voice or what voices, plural, if there are more than one, are speaking into your life? Who's speaking in your life? Who has your ear? Number 2, whose influence are you under? Who is it that really influences you? Number 3, whose counsel do you value? Very important. So what's the difference? Who has my ear? Well, I'm talking when I say whose counsel do you value? You know you value counsel when you don't listen, but then you begin to implement what you've heard. Not only do you implement it, but you know you're not as good without it. You know you need what they've got. And you sense inside of you on an intuitive level, you just know that for you to fulfill or max out or whatever it is God has called you to do, that you are going after by faith, you know you need what they carry, and you value the connection. You value the level of information and counsel they give you. You value it. You don't just listen, but you esteem it. You recognize its place and its role and its value and worth in your life and what God's up to and what you're going after. And number 4, whose ideas are shaping your thinking? whose ideas are shaping your thinking. As much as we want to spiritualize Genesis 27 and the prophetic blessing of Abraham, the blessing of God is going to come on Jacob's life through apostolic, because Isaac is a type of an apostle or an apostolic father in Jacob's life, in terms of a spiritual authority and a prophetic decree or declaration of the blessing of God's going to come upon Jacob, being spoken apostolically through Isaac, that forever establishes Jacob's role in the kingdom. But it was, so as deep and dynamic and powerful spiritually as that was, his being in position to experience that was the result of an idea. Rebekah's idea shaped Jacob's thinking, because Jacob had never before had the thought, apparently, this is Rebekah's idea, not Jacob's, to pretend to be Esau in order that he could apprehend and possess the blessing of Abraham, prophetically declared through the apostolic leadership that Isaac represented in Jacob's life at that season. So, as it relates to what God is doing on your journey, there are seasons when he's going to call you to be a Rebekah, to shape the future and use you as he did in your own situation with others, as he did with Rebekah, with Jacob. And also the fact that we all need those Rebekah-type prophetic leaders who shape the future because they've been called and positioned by God strategically in our lives to do so. When you encounter them, value them, treasure them. Who has your ear? Whose counsel do you value? Whose influence are you under? And whose ideas are shaping your thinking? Well, I appreciate you give me some flexibility to go just a little bit longer tonight. I appreciate that. Wanted to get this information into your thinking. I pray that it stimulates your thoughts. I pray that it provokes you on a prophetic level. I pray that it stirs and stimulates your faith as you go after everything God has put in you to pursue. By faith, worlds are created. By faith, worlds are created. And we won't go after what we don't have the faith to pursue. And it is my hope and prayer for you that as we walk through this series, that the Spirit of the Lord himself will give you both insight, impartation, and a fresh awareness of all that he's called you to pursue. And let the pursuer in you arise, and let the reacher in you go after everything that God wants to work through you to bring you into, so that you can become a shaper of the future yourself. God's up to some big things, and I'm so excited to be on the journey with you. Thanks again for being with us tonight. We will see you Sunday morning at Metro Life Church at 10 a.m. I love you. Be blessed. Have a great rest of the week, and we will see you Sunday morning or next Wednesday night right here at 7:30 p.m. for iChurch. Bless you.